G'day team, welcome back to another video. If you've just bought your first airbrush and you have no idea where to start, this video is for you. I'm going to be keeping things simple and running through all the things that I wish I knew when I'd first started, what airbrush and equipment you need, how to set it all up, thinning your paint, air pressure, trigger control, and probably most importantly, how to practice without ruining one of your very expensive models. So hopefully these are all the tips and tricks that you need to get started on your journey to becoming an airbrush master. With that being said, let's jump into it. Now, before we actually start using one, let's talk about what you need. And the first thing I'd say is you definitely don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on your first airbrush. When I first started, I bought this Master Airbrush G233. I think it cost me about 70 AUD at the time, and to be fair, it did everything I needed it to do. I only eventually upgraded because I wanted to treat myself, not because this thing broke or suddenly wasn't good enough. There are plenty of cheaper options online that are more than good enough to learn with. The main thing I'd look for is something that's dual action and gravity fed. Gravity fed just means that the paint goes into this cup on top, and dual action just means that this trigger controls both our air and our paint flow. Don't worry if that sounds confusing, I'll show you exactly how it works in just a minute. For general scale modeling, something around a 0.3mm needle and nozzle is a really good place to start. You can also find kits and combos online that come with some very useful cleaning gear. Little brushes, nozzle cleaning tools, and one of these great cleaning pots. We'll come back to all of this later. And then obviously you're going to need a compressor. Again, you don't have to go crazy here. I've been using this relatively cheap compressor for about 6 years now, and I genuinely have never had an issue with it. Ideally, just look for something with an adjustable pressure regulator, a moisture trap, and if you can, an air tank. Now, before we start spraying, always work somewhere well ventilated and ideally use a spray booth and a suitable mask. Proper extraction and respiratory protection are especially important. Right, so let's actually set this thing up. It's really simple. Our hose connects to the compressor here, and then the other end screws into the bottom of our airbrush. One little accessory I would definitely recommend though is one of these. It's just a quick release connector. One part stays attached to the hose and the other stays attached to the airbrush. Instead of unscrewing the whole thing every time I want to disconnect it and clean it, I can just pop it off straight away. Once that's all connected, turn the compressor on and we are ready to go. Now, before we put any paint in here, let's talk about the trigger. This is one habit you really want to get right from the start. With a dual action airbrush, pushing down gives us air. Then while I'm holding that airflow, if I slowly pull back the trigger, that's when the paint starts to come out. The further I pull back, the more paint I'm letting through. Now the really important bit is the order in which we do that. Air first, then paint. When I want to stop, I push forward to cut the paint, but I keep that airflow going. Then I can release the air. So it's air, pull back for paint, push forward for paint off, and then air off. And there's a really good reason behind doing it this way. If I pull back for paint first without any airflow, I can get a little bit of paint collecting around the nozzle. Then when I suddenly introduce air, we get a big splatter. Not exactly what we want happening on the wing of a model we've spent the last 3 weeks building. So from day one, try and get this into your muscle memory. Air, paint, paint off, air off. Do that every single time. All right, now we can finally put some paint into our airbrush. And paint thinning is probably one of the biggest things people get caught up when they first start airbrushing. You'll see people everywhere online saying use 2:1 ratio, use a 3:1, use 1:1. And the problem is there is no single magic ratio that works for every single paint and every single brand. If your brand's new, something like Vallejo Model Air can definitely make life a little bit easier because it's already designed for airbrushing and will often need very little thinning. If I'm thinning a paint and I'm not sure where to start, something around 2 parts paint to 1 part thinner can be a really strong starting point. But that's all it is, it's just a starting point. Different brands and different colors from the same brand can behave differently. Your first few times airbrushing are going to involve a lot of trial and error. What we're trying to find is what I like to call the sweet spot. If we go too far this way, our paint is too thick, it struggles to come through properly, doesn't spray nicely, and can eventually even clog the airbrush. If we go too far the other way, now we've got basically colored water. It's really easy to flood the surface, the paint can run everywhere, and our coverage becomes really weak. Somewhere in the middle is what we are looking for. The paint comes out easily, we're getting a nice fine mist, and I can actually control how much paint I'm putting down. That is the sweet spot. And don't feel like you need to nail it perfectly when you first mix the paint. You can adjust it as you go. Too thick, add a couple of drops of thinner. Gone too thin, just add a little bit more paint. The big thing is to make small changes. Personally, I like to mix my paint straight into the airbrush cup, but you can absolutely use a separate mixing cup or palette if you'd rather do that. My biggest tip in the whole thinning process is to count your drops. If I put in 20 drops of paint and 10 drops of thinner, I know exactly what I've started with. If that's a little thick, I add another 3 drops of thinner, and if that sprays nicely, I've now got a very good starting point for the next time I use that paint. The second reason why we want to count our drops is because if we just eyeball random amounts every single time, you might accidentally create the perfect mixture. You might also not. And if it is wrong, you're probably going to be eyeballing the fix as well. That's when you end up going backwards and forwards, adding paint, then thinner, then more paint, then more thinner. And in my experience, you waste a lot of paint and thinner by doing that. So count your drops because it makes everything much easier to adjust and repeat in the future. Now, air pressure is another big one. You'll normally see it measured in PSI, and for most general airbrushing, I normally start somewhere between 20 to 25 PSI and adjust it from there. Personally, with a lot of the paints that I use, I'm usually sitting somewhere around 21 or 22 PSI. But again, that doesn't mean 22 PSI is some magic number that you need to use. If I'm getting really close to the model and trying to paint fine camouflage lines, I'll often use a lower pressure. That gives me a bit more control when I'm working right up close. If I'm spraying something a little thicker and it's struggling to atomize properly, I might bump up the pressure. So don't get too caught up in finding the perfect PSI. Start at around that 20-ish mark, see how the paint is behaving, and then adjust it from there. And remember, pressure and thinning work together. Okay, now that we've got our paint spraying pretty nicely, it's time to grab that brand new $80 kit, and nope, not yet. If this is literally your first time using an airbrush, you need to practice first. I've actually made a free airbrush practice sheet that you can download using the link in the description. It's got a few simple exercises on it, different sized dots, circles, and some wavy lines to trace. And none of this needs to look amazing. With the dots, we're just trying to get used to how far away we need to pull that trigger back. And with the circles and lines, we're just trying to keep our paint flow nice and consistent. We're trying to get a nice even spray all the way across the whole sheet and keep practicing that trigger sequence while you're doing it. Air, paint, paint off, air off. The practice sheet is also a really good chance just to mess around with your settings. Change things and see what happens. Start by changing your distance away from the page. You'll notice as I move further away, you can see that the spray pattern gets wider. That's what we're generally going to use when we're doing things like base coating, priming, or trying to cover a larger area. Now, as I get closer, the spray gets much tighter, and that's how we start getting those finer lines. This is really where you learn to airbrush. I can tell you what settings I use all day, but your paint, your airbrush, and even the way you use the trigger might be slightly different to mine. So play around with it. It might take you 20 minutes to feel comfortable. It might take you an hour. And who cares? You're practicing on a piece of paper, not your really expensive model. Just to get comfortable holding the airbrush and controlling the paint. And while you're practicing, I'm actually really curious about this. What's the one thing you struggle with most when you're airbrushing? I'm working on a full airbrush troubleshooting video where I'm going to create these problems and show you how to fix them. So if there's anything that your airbrush keeps doing that drives you absolutely mad, chuck it in the comments and I'll try to cover it in the next video. All right, now we can finally paint the model. And probably the biggest thing I want you to remember here is light coats. For a general base coat like this, I'm going to sit a little further back so I've got a wider spray pattern. I'll start moving my hand, introduce the paint, and then keep moving across the model. I'm not sitting here trying to completely cover this entire area in one pass. 2 to 3 light passes are so much better than absolutely dumping paint onto the model in one go. If I sit in one spot for too long or apply too much paint, we can end up with runs, pooling, and spidering. Light coats also matter because look at all these tiny details. Panel lines, rivets, nuts, bolts, everything. If I bury this model under really thick layers of paint, I'm slowly filling all of that in, and those little details are exactly what we want to keep for things like washes and weathering later on. It's all of these tiny little details that you want to keep because they make your final version of your model pop. So just remember, thin paint, light coats, and build it up slowly. Now let's talk about cleaning, because keeping this thing clean can save you lots of headaches and even some money. If I'm just changing colors during the same painting session, I'll normally do a really quick clean. When I'm done painting, I'll spray whatever paint I've got left in my airbrush into my cleaning pot from earlier. Because I'm using water-based acrylics here, I'll normally put a little bit of water into the cup as well. That way I can use a larger brush to loosen up any paint that's still sitting in the cup. We can spray the rest of it into the cleaning pot, rinse it again or as many times as you need to. And once I've got most of that paint out, I'll move on to my proper airbrush cleaner. I'll use that with my brush to clean around and inside the cup, and then spray some through the airbrush. Once the spray is coming through clean, I'm normally good to move on to my next color. Once I'm finished painting for the day, I go a bit further, and you definitely should too. I really wouldn't recommend finishing a big painting session, spraying a tiny bit of cleaner, and then chucking the airbrush away for the next couple of days. There's still a chance you've got paint sitting inside some of those tiny internal areas, and once that dries, that's a big problem. Exactly how you pull your airbrush apart will slightly vary depending on what brand you've got, so follow the manufacturer's instructions for yours. On something like this, we're basically removing the rear handle, loosening the needle chuck, and then carefully removing the nozzle and the needle. And I really do mean carefully. The tip of the needle is very fine, and if you bend that, you're not going to have a good day after that. When I clean the needle, I'll use some cleaner and a microfiber cloth and wipe it along toward the tip. That way I'm not dragging the cloth back against that tiny point and risking it catching and bending. I'll then clean in and around the paint cup and the internal paint passage, basically the little pathway the paint travels to before reaching the nozzle. And then I'll carefully clean the nozzle and front components as well. Don't force any random metal tool or oversized brushes into any holes that they don't fit in. These parts are really small and pretty easy to damage, so save yourself some money and be careful. For the nozzle, I'll use one of these little needle tip cleaning tools. Gently insert it into the back of the nozzle and carefully rotate it to remove any dried paint inside. Once everything's clean, put it back together following the instructions from your airbrush manufacturer. And then you are good to go. It takes a few extra minutes, but genuinely keeps your airbrush super clean and probably one of the easiest way to keep it working properly. If you make sure you look after your airbrush, I promise you it will last you years. And that's pretty much everything you need to know to get started with airbrushing. Just remember, get your thinning and pressure right, keep those coats light, and most importantly, practice, practice, practice. If you're having problems with things like spidering, clogging, or splattering, I've also got a full airbrush troubleshooting guide available. If that's already out, you can click here or find the link in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. If this helped or you learned something new, please feel free to leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more scale modeling videos and tutorials. Happy modeling, and I'll catch you in the next one.